In this video, we'll briefly look at two of the different national schools of Romantic opera, Italy and Germany. This applies to chapter 32 in your book. Let's start with Italy. Italy, the Italian composers wrote in what was called the bel canto, or beautiful singing style. There's a handful of names that are associated with this style, among them Rossini, who is most famous for The Barber of Seville. And in fact, a lot of us grew up watching the Bugs Bunny cartoon, The Rabbit of Seville, which is a spoof on that. And then Donizetti, who's probably most famous for Lucia di Lammermoor. Both of these composers had a big influence on one of the greatest composers ever of opera named Giuseppe Verdi. Verdi was from the northern part of Italy. He was born in 1813 and died in 1901. I can't say that he did anything terribly new, but what he was famous for was bringing Italian opera to like the highest point, and he brought it to this point of just great refinement. He wrote 28 operas in all, and on this slide you'll see some of those operas. His first hit he wrote when he was at the age of 29 is called Nabucco, and it was in the 1850s that he gained international fame with these three operas: Rigoletto, which is about this hunchbacked court jester, the Il Trovatore, which means the troubadour, and then La Traviata, which is maybe the most performed opera ever, or at least one of them. La Traviata is about this tubercular courtesan who sacrifices her love for this man named Alfredo. If you guys have seen the movie Pretty Woman, it's based on that same story, which in fact is based on a real woman. Verdi was a supporter of the Italian liberation movement, and some of his operas contain choruses that are thinly disguised inflammatory appeals for a unified Italy. He was elected in the newly formed Italian parliament for a time, and he did continue writing operas. He wrote the grand opera Aida, which was premiered in Cairo, and it had live elephants on stage. This is big to do. He got paid a very large sum of money for that. And two of his later operas are based on Shakespeare, Othello and Falstaff. Verdi was committed to writing for the human voice and stuck to the bel canto principles, that is, writing beautiful melodies, very demanding technically for these great singers. And what he cared most about was drama, to write music for dramas that were about real people, realistic situations with strong emotions and exciting action. And this would be really quite different than what Wagner set out to do. A lot of Verdi's music is, I think, pretty straight ahead and clear cut. In the intro to opera video that I made, I talk about the aria and recitative as these two different kind of elements in traditional opera. And I think that when you watch a Verdi opera, that you really will be able to hear the clear distinction between them. Germany didn't have the same long-established opera tradition like Italy and France, although our book mentions the Singspiel, which is a light comic drama with spoken dialogue. Our book mentions the Singspiel as a predecessor of Romantic opera in Germany, and Mozart's Magic Flute would serve as an example. Another composer who was a great influence on the development of Romantic opera in Germany was a composer named Karl Maria von Weber, and he actually is the composer that first used what's called the leitmotif that we see in the next composer we're going to look at, which is the very influential composer Richard Wagner. Wagner is one of music's most controversial figures. He's been described as a hypnotic and influential personality, half con man, half visionary. There's a lot of things about his character that you might find less than nice. He didn't pay back his debts. He stole his friends' wives. He was anti-Semitic. And so feelings about Wagner ran high. As far as composing goes, he was considered to be the most influential Romantic composer after Beethoven and completely revolutionized opera. He also was a writer and developed elaborate theories on art, music, and opera. He thought that previously opera had catered to a decadent society and had degenerated to concert and costume. So he spent most of his life working the components of opera. In fact, he didn't even call his operas, he called them music dramas. There's a lot to say about Wagner, and I'm going to go through this quickly, but I encourage you guys to read more about his life and what shaped his interest in revolutionizing opera. He was German. He was born in Leipzig, and because of his stepfather, he had early interests in literature, music, philosophy, especially mythology and religion. Started out as an opera conductor. He was very influenced by the music of German composer Karl Maria von Weber. Spent 13 years in exile after the abortive revolution in Dresden of 1848 and 49. And due to running into financial trouble, he gained the support of King Ludwig II of Bavaria, who helped him eventually build his own opera house, his own opera theater in Bayreuth, Germany, that was built specifically for his music dramas. And they still perform there regularly, only the music dramas of Wagner. And I want to show you guys a picture of King Ludwig II's castle. This is a photo of Neuschwanstein, which is in the southern part of Germany, and it's King Ludwig II's castle. I've been here, actually just from the outside, I haven't gone in it, but apparently the rooms of the castle were inspired by Wagner's operas. And if you've been to, I think it's Disneyland, not Disney World, the Cinderella castle is modeled after this one. Wagner called his operas music dramas to emphasize the close relationship in them between music and drama, and he spent his life trying to accomplish his ideal of what's called Gesamtkunstwerk, or total artwork, in which all of the arts, music, poetry, drama, philosophy, were all fused. He believed that drama and music should be more balanced, disagreeing with the traditional view that music was the ends, drama merely the means. One of the big ways that Wagner revolutionized opera was by shifting the musical center of gravity from the voice to the orchestra, and he expanded the orchestra, some of his music requiring 8 horns and a new instrument that he invented called the Wagner tuba. His music sounds a lot different than Verdi's. What Wagner got was this continuous flow of music that's not formally divided into recitatives and arias or other set numbers. Music and dramatic continuity is achieved by smoothly connecting each section to the next. You might think of this as like an unending melody. I'm not sure that you'll get that from our less than 6-minute example in our book, but if you do get a chance to see a Wagner music drama live, you might think of the acts as being like long symphonic poems. Within the general continuity of action and music, Wagner uses a principal means for achieving formal coherence called the leitmotif that I mentioned earlier on. The leitmotif, or leading motive, was this basic recurring theme that represented a person, an object, or idea commonly used in Wagner's operas. It's kind of like the idée fixe that we heard in Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique, but instead of having just one recurring theme, there's a whole bunch of them, and they keep returning throughout the drama. And what's significant about the leitmotif is that it's not just a kind of musical label, but it's more significant than that, in that it accumulates meaning as it recurs in new context. They're varied and transformed through thematic transformation to convey the evolving dramatic situation and changes of character. The association is established by sounding the leitmotif, usually in the orchestra, at the first appearance or mention of the object or reference, and then by its repetition at each subsequent appearance or mention. And sometimes they interact with each other. If you guys have seen the Bugs Bunny video, What's Opera Doc, they make fun of, or pay homage to Wagner in many ways, and one of the ways is through the spear and magic helmet that Elmer Fudd is singing about. This has also changed cinema. If you've seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy or the Star Wars films, John Williams uses lots of leitmotifs. Here's an example. Well, that leitmotif, if you want to call it that, was a little bit longer than Wagner's. Wagner's are pretty brief for the most part. The leitmotifs guide the listener through the story, and this gets into philosophy, but what Wagner was trying to do is to tell us what the hero thinks or feels, even if he or she is saying something else. So the orchestra's role was to carry the music drama along, and they were the ones that would play these leitmotifs. They were hardly ever sung. Usually they happen in the orchestra. So the orchestra would carry the music drama along, no more recitatives and arias, and instead it was one long web woven with singing and a new intensity of emotional expression. I hadn't talked about this and I won't get into much detail, but there was also a psychological and philosophical significance to placing the leitmotifs in the orchestra. Wagner was very influenced by the philosopher Schopenhauer. If you're interested in reading more about this, there's a book called The Tristan Chord, which gets into explaining what he was trying to do. And some of you might find it interesting. The orchestra, of course, was really big. These new instruments were added, and what do you think as far as singing goes? You would need somebody that was able to carry through a very dense orchestra, so you required very, very powerful singers. Okay, well, I hope, again, I'm not sure that this is going to help so much with our famous excerpt in our book. It's pretty short, but I'm hoping that at some point in your life you guys do get to check out a Wagner drama, that this gives you some ideas of what to expect and possibly appreciate it. For me, it took it took a long time, but the more time I've spent with it, the more I appreciate the power in this music. Okay, just to close, I'd like to show you guys a slide that compares some of the differences between Verdi and Wagner. I can't make this slide any bigger. Hopefully you can see it. Verdi's focus was on realistic stories and characters, Italian passion, where the numbers were clearly divided up into recitatives, choruses, and arias. The vocal parts were the most important. That was the bel canto style, and for that reason it was mostly homophonic in texture, with functional harmony, a little bit of chromaticism, not as much as in Wagner. Fast-paced drama, emotional expression. Wagner's subject matter was German philosophy, just much heavier. He drew from myths and legends. Each long had this feeling of continuous, unending melody. You can think of them like long symphonic poems. The orchestra tells the story. The textures are much more polyphonic, and he was very chromatic. In fact, we can credit Wagner not so much in the example that you guys have in your book, but Wagner is sort of credited with taking the first steps to destabilizing a tonal center. So when we get to the wild and crazy music of the 20th century, we can actually give Wagner credit for helping us, taking us down that road. Wagner's music is deliberately slow and has everything to do with psychological revelation and changing society.